Hey everyone, how are you doing today? My name's Nick.
My name is Dave. Are we suddenly on an NPR program?
I don't know, I just felt like switching it up.
Yeah,
just
delicious
wanted to
dish.
try something new for
What is
today.
it? Yeah.
It's March, we're in Lent, might as well see what happens.
Is this your Lenten voice?
This is my Lenten voice.
Okay.
So
Right.
today we're going to be talking about everything in between. No. Today we're talking, we're starting our diving into our new Lenten series. It's called Everything in Between. And I think it'll be interesting to really get into this because I think this is kind of a topic we have kind of sporadically kind of hit on through a lot of these other sermons. And now to really dive deep into how do we live our faith in these, whether they're in between these high times or these low times, just kind of this, these everyday times and stuff like that. So,
yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm excited about this series. I know where it's going. And
I'd hope so. You are the guy.
Yeah. So yeah, I think people are going to like it. I know I'm going to enjoy working through it. So let's get started.
Let's do it. Well, Dave, we are kind of in this in-between time for sports. There's basketball out there. I know you're a big basketball fan. Your Warriors are showing up here, kind of mid to late season, I guess, at this point.
They're the home stretch, and they're won 9 out of the last 10 games.
Yeah,
and beating some good teams. They've beaten some bad teams too. But
for sure.
Yeah. So it's fun for me right now.
Getting ready for the playoffs.
NCAA's cranking up. So.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have March. Tournament hasn't started though yet.
The feeder tournaments are the
right. Conference tournaments and stuff.
Yeah. So it's a great basketball time.
Now,
baseball's coming around.
I know. I can't
That's
wait.
Your thing.
So excited. So excited. Now, are you going to do a bracket?
I haven't done a bracket in years.
Really?
Yeah.
You seem like a guy I think would do a bracket.
We can do a bracket. We'll do an office bracket.
An office bracket?
Okay.
So when, just a real quick, and then we'll get into it, I promise, guys. But when I was younger, I used to go over to a guy's house. I think I've said this before, but he had 4 TVs. But my mom was a graphic artist.
Yeah.
So she made this giant bracket for us. I mean, size of half of this wall, and we hung it up on this guy's fireplace, and we were able to keep up. We put all of our brackets around it, and we were keeping up with it through this giant bracket. It was great.
And how long before yours was busted? First weekend?
Ooh, I don't remember that year. You know what? I've been fairly decent until recently. I feel like the last couple years that I've tried to do one.
Last year,
after the first day, I'm like, well, passing this one over.
Yeah, if this is your first time listening or watching this, we're not a sports podcast, but
maybe we will be
somehow. Yeah, that might be a
second venture for us.
Second venture for us. So, but we probably need to get into this series,
yes,
which actually technically started on Ash Wednesday.
Correct.
And I mentioned that because all these series, I try to preach them, and I preach in series generally. I try to preach them so that they're standalone. If somebody just showed up one time or they had to miss 3 weeks, that they're going to get something out of it. They did not have to have the thing from the week before.
The prerequisites.
I do try to think of that, or at least give enough reviews so that. And so, we just finished a series where it kind of built, as we're talking about the life of Joseph. Mm-hmm. And so there was some backtracking that had to be done. This one will stand alone, but yet they all fit together. I mean, they kind of pile on top of each other as you go through. And so this everything in between. We started on Ash Wednesday talking about intention and action, which, that for Lent or for the first of the year or any time is a good thing for us to consider, because lots of times we have these great intentions to do things, particularly as we enter the season of Lent. We're going to take on these spiritual disciplines or, add this Bible study or whatever to our life. And so we have great intentions, but it's the actions and the follow through that we sometimes are kind of thin on. Yeah. And so that's where we began. On Ash Wednesday was talking about intention and action. And this week, we moved in for the week 1, talking, and it was very familiar passage that most everybody knows. Even if they don't go to church, they probably know the story of the Good Samaritan. Right. I have been preaching for a long time. My first church where I was preaching every Sunday. I was youth pastor before then, but was in 94. So 31 years. I bet you I have preached 31 different sermons. I bet you at least once a year on the Good Samaritan.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Does it get hard to pull new things from it? Or do you just kind of recycle? Like, do you have a file folder on your computer that you're like,
there's always a little bit of a different maybe take on it, but it's a lot of it is also overlapping and review. And, a lot of things that I've said some form of probably in the past.
31 different ways.
31 different ways. But I think it's okay. I think it's one of those classic passages that's classic for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it addresses our human condition and also moves us. It shines the spotlight on us once again of where we might need to be stepping up more. But I started out, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you about that. I started out, and I thought long and hard about this, but I showed he gets us commercial from the Super Bowl, and however people, whatever they thought about it, was kind of the point,
right?
Because it was not without its controversy, right? And I'm sure that most of you have probably have seen it. If you haven't, it shows people actually doing good Samaritan type things
to people of all genders, races, sexualities, all this stuff.
Yes. And so almost immediately on social media, people started commenting. And what I had said was because I've served a lot of different churches, and most churches that I've served are like this one. They're people that are across the board politically and theologically. And so I was noticing that my progressive friends were outraged because they knew what the cost was, $100 million.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay. But I use the example of when the woman came and had the jar of perfume and put it on Jesus' feet, and people were criticizing her, and Jesus did, $100 million, I will admit that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
They also were questioning where does this money coming from? What are the politics of this? So there's all the kind of consternation that was going on about that. Then all my conservative friends going oh, here is just another woke thing, because they included, there was a one slide that had an LGBTQ image on it, and another one that looked like, at least they interpreted it as being pro illegal immigrant. So you've upset both sides, everybody.
Yeah, if you're going to make somebody angry, might as well make everybody angry, right?
And so we're talking about in between and living in between. Here we have it. And I think in the parable of the Good Samaritan, what's often lost on us, even though it gets reminded by every preacher ever preaches it, of just how offensive the fact that he made the Samaritan the hero of the story was. It would, in some circles, it would be like if you made a drag queen the hero of the story, or the KKK guy the hero of the story. That sort of thing. It was outright. The Samaritans, they culturally, religiously, they hated those people. Yeah. They would, and this came up on Ash Wednesday. The Jews would avoid going into Samaritan territory. They would walk miles and miles and days if they were taking a journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, just to avoid not going into that area. And yet in this story, Jesus makes the Samaritan the hero of the story. Yep. So, and it kind of harkens back to the intentions and the good intentions. And that was Ash Wednesday, and we're talking about stranger and neighbor here. But we'll come back to that in a second. But the stranger and neighbor thing, there's, I had a picture of a fence and talking about who is our neighbor. Yeah. Because really, that's the question that the young teacher of the law was asking. Then Jesus tells this story, and then he throws the question back on him: who was more of a neighbor in this case? Yeah. Yeah.
It's actually funny, as you were talking about that during service, my youngest leaned over and goes, "Isn't everybody our neighbor?" And I was like, remember that. Like, you know what I mean? It was just a cool kind of a moment, like an aha for her.
Everybody's a neighbor, but yeah, like we look for loopholes.
Yeah.
There's a book by Philip Yancey called "What's So Amazing About Grace," and our Wildflowers class are going through it. And the week before, my wife was teaching that particular week, and it was on the chapter that actually dealt with the Good Samaritan. So that's interesting. I'm preaching on that next week. And so we talked about some of the things that were in there. And the title of the chapter was Loopholes.
Yeah.
And because that's what the Pharisees were looking for, was a loophole. And I didn't go into this on Sunday, but, they had a thing, a very, like they did with a lot of the laws, a very specific thing about who your neighbor was. And I think it had to do with like a geographic, circle of like, those were your neighbors that you had sort of like, because the Bible's pretty specific throughout about taking care of the stranger and the neighbor and the immigrant and all that kind of stuff. But like they had to spell it out and look for the loopholes. And Jesus is basically saying, anyone who is in need, they're our neighbors.
Yeah.
And as your daughter pointed out, everyone is our neighbor.
Yeah.
But like, what about the people that believe differently, look differently, who are hostile towards us? Are they our neighbors? Do we have to treat them kindly as well? So it's a tough thing.
That is tough. And I think that's for us as Christians. I think we are called to show love and care to those people as well, but that doesn't make it easy.
Yeah.
I think, I think we have to be careful with it sometimes. Don't put yourself in too dangerous of situations, but also if there's needs in our communities, in our areas, we're not called to just sit by and watch things happen either.
Yeah. We live at a time, and this is what maybe we were talking about, is like we've touched on things before. We live in a time where we have been taught to fear our neighbor and to be suspicious of our neighbor. And maybe it was, I've only lived in this time, so I can't comment on
others.
Yeah, but maybe it's always been that way to a little bit, but it just seems like it's grown and grown, where we had a thing in our neighborhood. We have a neighborhood Facebook group, and the county was coming around doing tax assessment, and you should have seen the emails about that. These are suspicious people coming through the things. Like, there are signs posted, there were emails put out. They're going to be
they have a badge,
neighborhood. But it's just
sad.
like we live in a very safe neighborhood, and suddenly like these strangers are here. What are they doing here?
Yeah,
So
you're in Holly Springs, right? Holly Springs is like the safest city in Georgia. Did you know that?
It is. Yeah, that's what I saw that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So we're, but I mean, and part of that, I do appreciate the watchdogs, because there are bad guys that will come
take
in,
advantage.
and we do need to at least have some sort of guard up about that, and not and show some wisdom about that. But at the same place, when we assume that everyone is, against us, or everyone is wishing us harm, then it really does, I think, break down community.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that I put up that picture of the fence with it said, "Who is my neighbor?" is that there's a pretty famous saying, "Good fences make good neighbors." You've heard that before, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you know the origin?
I didn't.
Okay.
Part of me was like, maybe it's like a Wilson, Tim the Tool Man kind of relationship type thing. But I didn't know the origin.
So, but you've heard that phrase. What have you thought that phrase meant, or been taught that phrase meant? Good fences mean.
I've never really thought, I've just heard it in passing, so I never really spent a long time thinking about it.
Well,
it was just
the slant I've always heard on it is, good fences make good neighbors, is that we do need to have those barriers. We need to have those, and, if we're talking about, mental health or something, we may be, the whole boundaries issues is another thing.
Sure.
But, Robert Frost wrote that poem. It's called The Mending Wall.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote that, ironically, good fences make good neighbors, because he was talking about the breakdown of community. That's what that poem is addressing. And yet that phrase that's been lifted out of it has been used to communicate something that's
the opposite
of what the poem point was.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's Jesus's point as well. One of the things that that I said on Sunday is that I feel like lots of times we ask this question if we see somebody on the side of the road like that, either physically or metaphorically, why should we stop and help? And lots of times it comes back to us, what will happen to me if I were to stop and help? What is the worst thing that could happen to me if, somebody's broken down on the side of the road?
Right.
Yeah. Or the homeless person that's down by the Publix. What if I get involved with that, what's going to happen to me?
Yeah.
Right?
That's what you always kind of think about, I can admit in times, I've seen needs, but I've been like, I got to be somewhere in 10 minutes.
Right.
This will probably take 20. I don't want to be late. You know what I mean? Like we can make these, maybe half excuses or whatever, but, I generally think sometimes it's more because we don't want to, more so than it is the inconvenience.
So, getting back to the intention action part of this, I don't think, like I said that, I talked about all the different kinds of friends that I had on social media on Sunday, and across the political spectrum, the theological spectrum, and at least in my memory, I remember a time when that people were able to come to church with people that were believed very differently than they did, politically or theologically or whatever, lifestyle-wise. And there was at least a sort of civility that was there. And whether they accepted their differences or not, there was at least a civility that was practiced. There was a tolerance towards the other that I've seen the breakdown of, particularly over, say, like the past 10 years. And social media has had a lot to do with that, where people who don't know each other are screaming at each other online about, some point that they made or some meme they posted or whatever. And, but if you talk to anybody on whatever side, almost everybody will say, I long for those days when we were more tolerant or more, accepting, those days where there was more civility.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we may have those intentions, but do our actions reflect that? Do we pile on in the comment section? Do we, post something that we know is going to be controversial? And get people, into their corners. So,
I don't know. I wish that we could be more civil. You're talking about, you have other people who say this, they like, that's how I feel. I hate the idea of having to figure out something 100% on my own that maybe I may not fully understand. And if I can't ask the questions about things, if I can't talk to somebody who might be more knowledgeable, like, how am I supposed to generate an educated feeling? Because, and I don't know about you guys, I don't believe everything I read on the internet. I would rather talk to a trusted person and go, tell me why I should think this or that. You know what I mean? Like,
and me too. But I think in the same way that your daughter would say, everybody is our neighbor, I think most people, at least church people, would say that we should be kind to everybody, And so we do have these intentions, but we do look for those loopholes. Of why this is the exception, why I can't do this time. And I'm not saying be best friends with a homeless person and put them in your car and drive them.
Sure.
I'm not, I mean, you can be smart about it. But where is our heart in it? Rather than vilifying that person, or looking for a way out, how can we be part of the solution and not just ignoring the problem?
Right.
And so I think that's part of what this Good Samaritan, does to us. The other thing I mentioned on Sunday, but we can talk about a little bit here, is that I wonder how the man who was who was left there by the side of the road, how he felt when he saw who was coming to take care of him was.
I've never thought about that. Like,
Because he's a Jew too. What if you saw the person coming to your aid is the person that you hate the most,
that you're despising,
that you despise the most, and that's the person that's giving you aid. What is our reaction on that too? And so I've heard a preacher one time talking about I was like, oh, I need help.
Not from you.
Help, out. Next guy comes by. Yeah, how about I need help? Oh no.
Yeah.
No. I'm feeling much better now.
Yeah. I wonder if it's kind of like that analogy of like God sending something to help you. You know what I'm talking about, where like there's a flood, you end up on the roof and you're like, God, please help me. And like a boat comes and goes, no, I don't need the boat. God's going to say, like, he provided all these things along the way, somebody comes up with a paddleboard, like all these things. And he's like, no, God's going to save me. Like, I wonder if it's a similar thing like that, where it's like, I need help, but I need the certain person to help me here.
Right. Yeah. Good point. But I think that's, it's that in-between state that we are.
Yeah.
We're not going to all move to doing it perfectly, nor, or even all that, there is some wisdom and discernment that goes into it, but can we move more towards the attitude that I think the Samaritan had? And I'd mentioned, what's going to happen to me if I react in this situation to this stranger?
Yeah.
And look at them as a neighbor, rather than look at what's going to happen to me. It's like, what's going to happen to them if I don't?
Yeah.
What will happen to them?
Yeah.
And that should be our motivation, that sort of empathy that should grow within us,
right,
to caring for the other person. So we see a person broken down on the side of the road, at least call 911, make sure they got help. I mean, with cell phones, we assume that everyone does. I mean, I'm not asking some single woman by herself to pull over when they see a car. I'm not. But there's steps and actions that we can take. Sure. To be a neighbor. That hopefully this sermon and this series will inspire us to be. It's interesting, and not to get ahead of myself, but where I'm headed on Sunday, we're looking at faith and works, and it's the very next story in Luke that happens right after the Good Samaritan, and it's Mary and Martha. And we'll talk about this in the podcast next week too, so I won't break it down too much. But it's interesting because in the Good Samaritan, Jesus is basically saying, don't just sit there, do something, right? Intention and action. Yeah. And in the story of Mary and Martha is not just, don't do something, sit there. And so those things don't have to be diametrically opposed. Yeah. There's times for all of that. Yeah. But I think part of the purpose that we have is in following Jesus is to be able to develop that discernment to know when to sit, when to pray, when to take action. Yeah. And so anyway.
But I wonder if that kind of goes with what I was just kind of thinking about is, there's so many things out there that need attention and help, whether, we've recently been talking about the foster care. We've recently been talking about the needs in Kenya and here talking about, a homeless person in our community or whatever is, I know that I can't be all things to all people, but is there some discernment space of saying I might not be all things to all people, but I can be something to these people and taking action with maybe this part that I'm passionate about or whatever. Does this make sense?
It does. I think at that point, you have to trust your warm-hearted instincts. Yeah. But what I would hope that we are developing as a congregation and as Christian individuals is more of an empathetic heart. Yeah. Because it's so easy to look for the loopholes. It's so easy to look for everyone else is doing, or that's not my thing, or that's not my passion. And hey, it might not be. Right. But it might be if we don't close ourselves off to it. So I think
give it a shot.
Think as
sure.
we develop our God heart, our heart that's seeking after the things of God and growing in that love and that empathy, it is to trust those warm-hearted instincts. I'll give you one more example, and I know we're probably getting close to the end of time, aren't we?
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay. I have, and you have too, just by virtue of being on staff, we encounter a lot of people looking for help, calling the church, coming by the church, that sort of thing. And over the years, I have learned to have my guard up. And I can almost read it, because there are people who take advantage of the system.
100%.
That is for sure.
Yep.
And there's been a couple of books written about this, one called When Helping Hurts, and the other is called Toxic Charity, where we're not even putting Band-Aids, we're exasperating the situation with what we're doing, and particularly people that come by the church or call the church, and there are people, and this, not everybody, there are legitimate people that are looking.
Yes.
And this may sound the opposite of what I've been talking about with the Good Samaritan all the time, but there are people that just have a list of churches and they just call them
same
all day
time
long.
every month.
Yeah, they do it. So, and so we have steps that we do in how we give that kind of aid through the church. But occasionally I'll have somebody who'll tell me about an encounter that they had. This person showed up at their business, and they were, and because of my experience, I already have my guard up about, like, I'm not sure about this, but I always tell them to trust their warm-hearted instincts.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get used. But I'd rather be used in that way, I think, than to make my heart so hard that I'm not moved by that story.
Sure.
I remember there was a church that I was in years ago where there was this kid that had cancer, and people were raising money for the cancer, and the parents were doing this thing and everything. And there was one guy that was in like a little small breakfast Bible study with me, and he's a pretty wealthy guy, and he had given a pretty good bit of money to this cause, because it's very compelling. Kid's got cancer.
Sure.
All right, well, you know where this is going.
I have an assumption.
Okay, kid didn't have cancer.
Yeah.
It was all ruse. And here's his attitude. Never will forget, he said, and when he found that out, I was with him, he said, he doesn't have cancer? That's the best news I've heard all day. And so I think that's, because he wasn't going to die. He didn't have cancer. So, I don't want to see people get jaded because of a bad experience they've had with trying to be a good Samaritan.
Yeah.
But in the same case, I think we do have to have this attitude. It's like, it's my response in my heart. I'm going to try to do this good thing. And sometimes there's risk in that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I might get burned and I might get used. But that's okay. My intention was not that.
Yeah.
My intention was to do a good thing. And so I'll go on to do the next good thing. So does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah. I mean, I'm just sitting here kind of thinking like, I mean, it's like when you give a gift, you're not watching for somebody to go, how are you going to use that gift exactly? Like sometimes you just do it because you love the person, you care for them, and you go, I think you wanted this or whatever. That's the basic level. But like, I think when you give to the homeless, or, you give somebody $5 on the street or something like that, because it was your warm-hearted, what'd you say? Warm-hearted?
Trust your warm-hearted instincts.
Right. Your warm-hearted instinct.
Because I can't say how God's moving in your life.
Right.
And so, I in some cases, I might give a caution.
Right.
I mean, you really don't need to have that person moving into your room.
Yes. Yes.
But who's to say? I mean, Teresa and I, as much as I preach that, Teresa and I had a guy come and live with us for 6 months.
Right.
So I'm not saying that like, you've got to trust your warm-hearted instincts.
Yes.
With that, and just realize that there's going to be risk in that. But as I say, I'd rather be thinking use your wisdom, use your discernment, all of that. But at the end of the day, trust those warm-hearted instincts. And I think even if we find out something that might make us a little jaded in the end, that I'd rather power through that and do the next right thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. I hear you.
Yeah.
All right, Dave. Well, we are here kind of at the wrap up time, and you've already kind of given us a sneak peek of next week, a little bit, talking about Mary and Martha.
Yeah. The problem with, not problem with, and we'll do the podcast on wherever we need to. We're doing this on Tuesday this week. We usually do it on Sundays. I'm fresh off the sermon and haven't really even got into the next week. My problem is I wrote this week's sermon yesterday. So like I'm kind of balancing these two things.
He's in between them right
so
now.
I'm trying not to get
He's in this
ahead
sermon
of that,
purgatory or whatever.
But I really do like this take on faith and works.
Yeah.
And, so we'll look at that next week in the podcast and be preaching there on Sunday, and hope everybody will tune in.
Yeah, there you go. All right, guys. Well, we appreciate you guys so much for watching. You know where to drop comments if you need to drop comments. If there's anything personal that's going on that you need to talk to either me or Dave about, just shoot us an email. And without any further ado, we'll catch you guys next time.
God bless everybody.